Sleep is the cousin of death. At least that's what I tell myself sometimes to not feel any medical anxiety about my insomnia. But then again, I've never even considered seeing a doctor about my insomnia because I like it. I assume that most people would fall asleep when combing over a 224-page SEC filing or a German audit. Not me. If you haven't figured it out yet, I am obsessed with data, especially data that nobody wants me snooping through. And all of this data analysis over the last couple days is to answer a question that is in all of our minds. What the is going on in the music production business world? And what does it mean for musicians? This isn't going to be some big expose. I mean, I guess if you're not familiar with the reckless and illegal stuff that plagues the financial world on a daily basis, it will be. But I'm basically trying to answer this question by solving a series of puzzles and interpreting numbers. And I've also put a hard cap on the amount of days that I'm allowing myself to analyze this data. By the way, one of the reasons I can make a video like this right now without it being legally or even ethically problematic is because I have no investments open on anything. I have no skin in this whatsoever. I am completely out of the private and public market. If you're an investor, or if you're thinking about being an investor, this is not investment advice. And that being said, some of the things you'll hear about in this video are losses as a result of not hiring a competent personal investment consultant in this space. So as a general disclaimer and the advice of my lawyer, nobody outside of YouTube and my patrons are paying me anything in this video, and the data that I have been analyzing could be intentionally or unintentionally misleading. I can also make mistakes, so think of this as an op-ed and do not make financial decisions as a result of this video. Seriously, do your own homework. Before we get going, I have some friends and associates that I have bounced some ideas or data off of to just get a second opinion. I want to thank them for their help. They probably want to remain anonymous. And final disclaimer, I reached out to a lot of people involved in these financial exchanges for interviews. A few declined, most didn't even bother responding. Oh well, let's go. All right, so chapters to this saga. I guess we'll start with the big one, Native Instruments and iZotope and Plugin Alliance and Brainworks being sold to a private equity group and becoming Soundwide. It was just announced that InMusic has bought Moog. Avid has been exploring being sold. ImageLine, the makers of FL Studio, have bought UVI and Melda Productions. Sequential, or previously Dave Smith Instruments, was bought by Focusrite. The controlling stake of Sweetwater was sold to a private equity firm. Epic Games bought Bandcamp. Waves, in my subjective opinion, is trying to be acquired. In this talking head, we'll talk about some other stuff, and to spice things up, I'll even do some Jim Cramer-style predictions, except with hair. For the best experience, you're going to want to pop some Adderall and watch this at double speed. Come on, let's dig in. So real quick history here, and in full transparency, way back in 2006, I was endorsed by Native Instruments as a recording artist when they were trying to push out Core. If anybody remembers Core, it wasn't the most reliable or liked piece of gear, and let's just say that my feedback wasn't well received. But obviously, there's no denying that Native Instruments is an extremely important centerpiece that helped define how music technology works today. And for a long time, nearly everything they brought to market was an incredible innovation. But their original concept alone was pretty innovative at the time because it was creating music software that could run in a home studio on a personal computer, and the late 90s tech boom allowed them to get the venture capital investments to make that happen. But allegedly, about a decade later, they either made the mistake of underpaying talent or couldn't pay their talent what they were worth, and competitors poached some of the developers behind the innovation. But from a business perspective, that's kind of okay, because it turns out that there's a lot more money to be made from DJ tools and more generalized things than techie stuff like Reactor and Absinthe. So they took a stab at growing in an entirely different way, and it worked out well enough for them to get bought by a private equity group, EMH Partners, for $50 million in 2017. In 2019, they hired some outside management from the tech world and then fired them not long after. And in 1 year, Native Instruments would fire over 200 employees. In 2020, EMH injects some more money and becomes the majority owner of Native Instruments, while the company launches a subscription service with a free bundle as a hook. What else happened in 2020? Oh, right, everybody stayed indoors and looked for new hobbies to take up. Take note of this phenomenon, because most of the bad things happening in the music creation microeconomy can be partially, if not entirely in some cases, attributed to this bubble. As we will soon explore, the pandemic led to overvaluation that is now being corrected, and with some software companies, it probably could have been avoided to some extent. It's a bit difficult and obviously inaccurate to armchair appraise a company retroactively, so this is entirely my opinion, but I would say that at the end of 2020, after the skyrocketing growth the pandemic had caused, Native Instruments was worth about $50 million on paper, but things were really troubling because they experienced a 20% increase in sales, yet their earnings carried forward was almost negative 4 million euros. So a lot of expenses are gutted, and on paper, the company is reframed. Here we have one of the biggest and most respected and iconic brands in pro audio, and we just experienced 20% growth. And we expect these new and prospective customers to give us their credit card information and start paying us a hefty monthly fee for our intellectual property. And that's not all. We also own Sounds.com, which is going to be absolutely huge and wipe out Splice and pretty much interrupt the entire loop and sample industry. So let's introduce Francisco Partners, a massive private equity firm that owns LastPass, Eventbrite, ZocDoc, GoodRx, Corsair, and lots of other things. By the way, this is kind of weird to suss out, but Francisco Partners as a company is really interested and passionate about sea turtles, so much that they've moved part of their business to the Cayman Islands. That's how obsessed they are with sea turtles. Or tax evasion, I suppose that's another possibility. Anyway, I can only imagine what was on this pitch deck, but they see this package and read these numbers, and Francisco Partners decided that they would like to own Native Instruments. And while they've worked extremely hard to bury this number, including everything from refusing to disclose investments to the SEC to seemingly not even filing at all with the UK, which you might want to get on, they formed yet another subsidiary called Music Creation Group, and Music Creation Group pays close to 773 million euros in additional goodwill for Native Instruments, iZotope, Plugin Alliance, Brainworks, and SoundStax, which wasn't even a registered business at the time. Rumor has it that Native Instruments alone sold for close to $500 million. Just 9 months later, Francisco Partners investments will have depreciated by 105 million euros. Even after claiming a revenue of 130 million euros, the consolidated net loss would be 87 million euros. There also appears to be an outstanding loan debt of 250 million. Oh yeah, and Soundwide wasn't ever really a thing outside of press releases and marketing. As of this month, it has been retired, and now all of the companies will be bundled under Native Instruments. Their new logo is kinda not that good, and apparently whoever is doing their artwork doesn't know what a piano keyboard looks like. I see a lot of bundling and cost cutting. I'm assuming that Francisco Partners wants to do what they do, rebundle and combine things they own and exit with a profit. That's obviously not going to happen, but they will acquire a few more things to stir the pot. So Spitfire has recently laid off some staff, and allegedly Christian Henson has split up some of the staff between London and Edinburgh. There's some other stuff I'm not going to mention publicly. It's just my opinion, but it looks to me like Native Instruments may acquire Spitfire and then bundle the IP into a subscription. This would probably lead to more layoffs, but they would probably keep a skeleton crew around to hold up the illusion of potential growth. I'm sure there is a whole bunch that I don't know, but I personally think that this would be a terrible move that at best would be correcting a mistake by doing the exact same thing that caused it, but multiplied by obsolescence. On one hand, the last video I did was on the Osmos, which is entirely built on physical modeling and uses no samples at all. It is capable of sounding more natural than samples due to the organic articulation. On the other hand, we already have a half dozen AI engines that can generate music or samples via a text prompt. Buying a company that solely made a bunch of resource-intensive samples for a legacy sampler in 2023, only to try and exit that investment when AI and dataset articulation is more accessible to musicians would be, well, you know what, you do you. I do think that there is one pretty clear move that Francisco Partners can do to exit their Native Instruments investment with a gain within 3 to 5 years, and I'm not telling anybody what that is unless I'm getting points. I do a weekly live stream, and news like this in the audio world before it's announced, when you're streaming, feels like you're hanging out with a good friend and you know that their partner is having an affair with somebody else, but you cannot say a word about it. But InMusic, the owner of Akai, who makes the infamous MPC sampling drum machines, has bought Moog synthesizers. I'm honestly not that surprised, and I'm also not as bummed out as a lot of people are, because Moog, while I love their products, have always seemingly been in some form of turmoil. To me, it seems like Moog has always enjoyed this public aura of being run like a hippie collective and using that to justify their high prices prices, while kind of actually being run by a hippie collective, except that 51% of all meaningful decisions were made by the actual owner, Mike Adams. They also enjoyed a Made in USA aura, which was really just local assembly in their Asheville, North Carolina facility, which a lot, if not the majority of pedal and modular companies already do for quality control. And then in complete contrast to that, you have a really disorganized and chaotic labor union battle with workers making overpriced synths for $14 an hour combined with a chip shortage. Then in the last couple of years, a sexual harassment and civil rights lawsuit, which I'm not even going to share an opinion about that, but I did find that the plaintiff's lawyer was previously suspended for some financial fuckery. I also found out that there's a newspaper called North Carolina Lawyers Weekly, which brings us to InMusic, a private company owned by Jack O'Donnell that, at least online and in hearsay, doesn't have a very good reputation for what it does to the brands that it acquires. A lot of people consider it to be where brands go to die. I don't know. We got Akai, M-Audio, Denon, Alesis, Headrush. Some grow, some die. It's not the best batting average. But in general, InMusic support and QA and developers are kind of fragmented globally, with a lot of them being outsourced, which is a far stretch from the hippie collective vibes that Moog had. It would be safe to assume that one of the reasons that InMusic has a questionable reputation to musicians and especially MPC users is because Jack O'Donnell allegedly refused to pay royalties to Roger Lynn, the original creator of the MPC that Akai later bought, according to this now infamous clip.
And then he had his lawyers sent me threatening letters, when in fact he was the one who was stopping my payments. And it's basically lawyer bullshit where they try to intimidate you. And it worked. I basically didn't want that sort of energy in my life.
There are a lot of things that could have happened there, and we simply do not know the details or how it ended up, and we probably never will. Anyway, from my limited perspective, I don't really see how Moog could have survived anyway with their pricing structure and slowing sales and rising interest, and I just hope that the employees that owned the 49% were compensated well. I don't feel like I have that far-fetched of a prediction. This will almost, unfortunately, result in more layoffs. I don't really see a benefit in keeping the Asheville Moog facility open if it isn't making money, especially considering how much of Akai's workforce is outsourced to developing countries. But I do believe that it is an intentional sale, not one that would just exist for the purpose of exiting the investment in a few years. I think we'll see Moog's intellectual property appearing in more places, whether legitimately using the circuitry or not. We might see official Moog plugins or Air devices. I don't really see a Moog MPC hybrid or any innovative developments like that. Behringer has done quite well with Moog clones, and I think InMusic can dabble in interfering with that by making more affordable reissues of recognizable classics that'll appeal to more casual musicians. I think the logo has a lot of power in that case. From sources and citations seemingly unknown, news broke that Avid, the owner of Pro Tools and Media Composer and Sibelius, was exploring the idea of being sold. I am probably in the minority here, but I think that Avid still exists in its current form solely because they are a publicly traded company, and I think they're the only publicly traded company in this space. Through various sources of data, I can guesstimate that Pro Tools represents a quickly shrinking 9% of overall primary music production software licenses. I think, or I hope, that the management and controlling interests in Avid see where things are headed, and this is an entirely baseless accusation and opinion, but I also think that they leaked a rumor to rescue their stock before it collapsed entirely, as they had lost close to 40% of their value in about 2 weeks. My hot take prediction is that nobody in their right mind is going to buy Avid for anywhere close to their market valuation, which I believe currently sits around $1 billion. My unsolicited advice for Avid would be to maybe push a small maintenance update where if you click in the help menu, there is a little bit of text that says Elon Musk is gay, and then publicly say that you will never sell the company to Elon Musk, and by the end of that workday, he will probably acquire the company for twice the value. ImageLine, the company that makes FL Studio, aka Fruity Loops, has acquired UVI and Melda Productions. This one wasn't exactly predictable, but on paper it's not all that surprising. As far as I know, both UVI and Melda were balancing their books just fine. But what a lot of people don't realize is that ImageLine is an extremely profitable company. They have a huge market lead and a fraction of the overhead and employee headcount that their competitors have. It seems like they're just buying small companies that have growth potential as a strategy to hedge inflation, which is actually a pretty good thing for musicians. It keeps industry money in the industry, and if UVI or Melda ran into a rough patch, they'd now have a pretty hefty lifeboat. My baseless prediction that nobody asked for, both UVI and Melda have a subscription option. UVI is mostly sample-based with the exception of the hugely powerful Falcon and then some of the other plugins. Melda is almost entirely effects, and really good ones at that. I think the two bundled together in something like Sonic Pass would be a no-brainer. I do not see FL Studio becoming a subscription thing or becoming part of that bundle though, nor do I see the instruments getting integrated into FL Studio or part of FL Studio, at least anytime soon. If there's one thing to complain about with FL Studio, it's that there's already so much going on with the DAW itself that it could be overwhelming for new musicians or people transitioning from a more minimal interface. I tried to find some SEC filings. I looked at CapIQ and Bloomberg, and like everybody else, Providence Equity did not want to disclose the sale price. I think I did manage to eventually find the number, but it is not entirely public information. I've seen a lot of people complain about this buyout. My take is that it's just probably a major advantage to Chuck Surak, Sweetwater's previous owner. Either he just wanted to retire and relax, or he saw the writing on the wall, and that writing is that American retailers in particular up prices by quite a lot, and with MAP policies, this means that if I make a pedal, I have to sell it for the same price that Sweetwater would mark it up to. Chase Bliss pedals dumped retailers entirely. Ableton did with the Push 3. I feel like most retailers can at least sense some cold air, as they're the first to go when a company is having cash flow issues. I understand that some people do like their favorite retailer. I like some retailers, and I'm an affiliate partner with some of them, but I'm not sure what kind of kinship people feel with retailers that they think would be lost with a private equity or venture capital stake. Retail is a highly competitive and expendable position. If they all of a sudden start being terrible to deal with, then order from another retailer. All right, baseless prediction time. I think that Sweetwater will eventually get bundled with another large specialty retailer and then rebranded and sold. I think that if Providence Equity holds on to the brand for more than a few years, it'll lose money on exit because giant companies like InMusic are already experimenting with limited editions that don't ship to retailers. I don't think that they're growing their own shipping department for the lulz. I think that they're experimenting with cutting retailers out of the deal. And unless you're a storefront where people can test out gear, you're either a middleman or you're competing with Amazon. Sequential, or previously Dave Smith Instruments, sold to Focusrite. Focusrite also owns Novation, Oberheim, Martin Audio, and so on. I don't really see Focusrite as an equity salesperson, and I assume that they intend to improve on the brands they acquire or utilize their supply chain to make them more efficient. Probably a little weird to go from a smaller company like DSI and then have to report to a human resource department, but like I mentioned earlier, money staying within the industry is generally a good thing. Waves, Antares, and so on. I think that if a non-monopolized company, so like not Adobe or Microsoft, immediately diverts to a forced subscription model, they're trying to artificially increase their value. Most equity appraisers value subscribers at around 3 times that of a license holder. It used to be much more than this. So a couple months ago when Waves announced their forced subscription model, my subjective opinion was that they were priming themselves for a buyout offer. And obviously that blew up in their face, and it became apparent that they could actually lose over 2/3 of their customers, which would devalue them. So they backpedaled. But if there are any software companies watching this considering going to the forced subscription model, I have some unsolicited advice. These VC appraisal phenomena existed in parity with low interest rates. They also existed alongside subscription things like Spotify and MoviePass, which have lost a lot of money. I would at least entertain the possibility that the overvalued subscriber rule is something that appraisers are still using, but investors are not. My boldest prediction that will definitely affect the pro audio world, but goes way outside of the pro audio world, is Apple layoffs for the first time since 1997. And I know I sound crazy, but I think that it's a result of a combination of a lot of things. The pandemic just led to this weird tech adoption bubble that was coupled with chip shortages and supply chain issues right as blitzscaling strategies were not panning out, combined with interest rates and a bear market that will probably be deflating the share prices. It's worth mentioning, almost to the point where discrediting my own opinion in my own head, I really, really hope that I'm wrong. As far as pro audio is concerned, when I try to remove myself from this space and look at it from a purely economic standpoint, Legacy products have a life cycle, and there's no reason to believe that their parent companies or inventors aren't tethered to those life cycles if they're not keeping up with R&D. For example, Native Instruments software is iconic, and I owe them not only respect but gratitude because it's inspired me to make a lot of things throughout my career. But the last iconic product they released was, I guess some people would say machine, but really it's probably FM8 or Guitar Rig, and that's what, 2004? The same goes with Waves plugins, Antares, the makers of Auto-Tune, Pro Tools, who are all actively still developing new things, but all of these things have dozens, if not hundreds, of competitors. The name is iconic, the product is nostalgic, the value of the brands are probably inflated. Oh yeah, and this isn't really in the pro audio space, but it is related. Epic Games buying Bandcamp. That was a surprising one, and I actually was a consultant a long time ago for Bandcamp before they went live, and it's been a little disappointing to see Bandcamp outgrow their roots, but that's just what growth does. And like I probably already mentioned, I don't really mind external money coming into the music world if it's not buying a controlling interest. In this case it did, and it's not really a prediction, it's just common sense. Epic will attempt to transform the business into a more profitable one, or they'll make some changes to increase the value and sell it to a private equity firm. Probably both. And that's just capitalisming. You either grow or you stagnate while your competitors grow. It feels like in music tech and a lot of tech in general, we're going to experience a culling across the board and lose a lot of great brands. The good news is that the music software microeconomy is still an extremely open and democratic one. Just a few videos ago, I featured a friend's sequencer that resembles Factorio and is on Steam, and it's their first coding project. With the exception of gaming and really niche things like WordPress plugins, you can't really do that in most microeconomies, and I think that overall, it's something that should be protected because it benefits both musicians and investors. It increases the velocity of money. Every dollar you spend on A licenses a library from B, who invests in C. But of course, I very, very much do not enjoy reading the news of layoffs or an industry culling. I don't like predicting it, it's quite nauseating, and I honestly hope that I'm wrong. On a pleasant note, if you like this video, you can join my Patreon community. This channel here operates as a nonprofit organization, and if you would like to not only be helping fund content like this, but getting access to a whole bunch of cool things and monthly songwriting challenges and so on, it is as little as $1. Thanks for watching, keep making stuff, bye.